What's up, everyone? How's it going? Today is May 14th of 2025. In today's video, we are going to do what I like to call a deep dive into a fascinating astrological riddle that connects Pope Leo XIV, the first American to ever be elected, a former resident of the Chicago, Illinois area, to the 1919 World Series scandal involving the Chicago White Sox. Now, what makes this decode so interesting is that yesterday, news broke that Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson were among several of the players Major League Baseball reinstated yesterday, May 13th, thus making them eligible for the Professional Hall of Fame. And when I saw this news story, I must admit, I was quite upset. And you might be wondering, well, why do you care if these guys are in the Hall of Fame? And no, that's not why I was upset. The reason I was kind of angry is because that same day, I was working already on a 4-part series of posts connecting Pope Leo XIV to the 1919 Chicago White Sox and the 1989 movie Field of Dreams, where Shoeless Joe Jackson of the White Sox is portrayed on screen by actor Ray Liotta. So, the way I saw this story is that I was looking at the Wikipedia page for the Black Sox scandal. I navigated away from it, and then I came back and saw this line, how in 2025 these guys were reinstated. And I thought to myself, how on earth did I miss this news story? How didn't I see this? Well, I didn't see it because it happened the same day I started working on this. Now, on my channel, I did a video on Pope Leo XIV that you'll find linked in the description below, as well as a number of other related videos that I've done on these topics in the past. And this video, as the thumbnail shows, you'll see I discuss the Chicago Cubs and their World Series victory and how it's synced up to the new Pope, who is from Chicago. And of course, we've been connecting the Pope to Chicago for months. You check out the thumbnails on my older videos, you'll find the Pope in a Bulls jersey. The Bulls, of course, the basketball team from Chicago. And then after the Pope died, it was the Pope's face over Chicago with the death of Mongo McMichael. Now, after I made this video, it actually came to light that Pope Leo is not a fan of the Cubs, but as a Southsider, he supports the black and white, the good guys at Comiskey, the Chicago White Sox. Now, not only did the Chicago Cubs endure a curse that lasted about a century between World Series championships, but so did their crosstown rivals, the Chicago White Sox. Whereas the Cubs spent 108 years without a title, the White Sox spent 88 years without a championship. So today, we'll look at the fascinating numerology and astrological riddle that ties all of these men together, as well as President JFK. That's right. What we'll be looking at is a significant riddle connected to Mercury, and with tomorrow, May 15th, being Mercuralia, I guess this is quite appropriate. So throughout this video, we'll explore how this all connects to the Yale Skull and Bones Code, as this Pope number 267 is truly the Skull and Bones Pope, as we will discover. And also, the two great American total solar eclipses, which I also like to call the Skull and Bones eclipses, as the path of totality stamped an X over the United States for these two solar events. So again, we have a lot to cover, and some of the numerology and gematria I'll be looking at in this video is a little bit experimental. Some of these phrases I wouldn't necessarily write out normally, but absolutely I believe they're relevant. And the way I see it, the fact that I was working on these posts before this news story came out is a bit of a confirmation of the connection that we'll be looking at. So again, this will be a deep dive, and it's a lot to digest, as most of my videos are, but I hope that I can provide some level of educational entertainment here in this video as we look at how all of these events are connected. And the reason I started looking into this in the first place is because in the news, we've been seeing pictures of Pope Leo XIV picked out of the crowd at the 2005 World Series during Game 1, when the White Sox broke the curse of Shoeless Joe. Pope Leo was at the game, watching intently. And this actually provides a layer of synchronicity to my personal life as well that we'll look at a little bit at the end of the video. So first, let's look at some of the numerology that explains why this story came out yesterday, May 13th. As yesterday was the 133rd day on the Gregorian calendar, and using the standard alphabetic order, where every letter is assigned a numeric value 1 through 26 based on its position in the alphabet, Chicago Black Sox equals 133. And these were the 8 men reinstated yesterday by Rob Manfred, in addition to Pete Rose. In the year 1919, the White Sox squared off against the Cincinnati Reds. And after they lost the World Series, it came out that several players had probably helped throw the World Series to benefit from gambling. And the accusations are actually a little bit murky, especially with Shoeless Joe, who put up outstanding batting numbers during the World Series. And it was a scandal unlike anything we've seen in the sport of baseball until the 1989 banning of Pete Rose from baseball. And in the year 1989, we also got a new Hollywood film called Field of Dreams, where, again, Shoeless Joe Jackson emerges from a cornfield to play baseball. In the year 2021, Major League Baseball began visiting the real-life Field of Dreams in Dyersville, Iowa, to play an annual game. Now, there's only been 2 of these games so far. They should be resuming in the near future. But we're going to look at how even this game is part of this massive riddle, as Pete Rose, another man banned for his gambling efforts, reinstated along with the Chicago Black Sox team. Now, they're called the Black Sox because they used to be the White Sox, and technically they've always been the White Sox. But this put a black eye on the sport, so they kind of changed their name to Black Sox. And this also provides a hint to the eclipse code, as during an eclipse, the sun turns essentially from white to black. Now, Pete Rose spent the bulk of his career playing for and managing the Cincinnati Reds, who just so happened to be the team that the White Sox played against in the 1919 World Series. On May 13th, the same day that the White Sox and Reds players were reinstated, the White Sox happened to be playing their one and only interleague series against the Cincinnati Reds that very same day. The White Sox won this game by a score of 5-1. And in Gematria, 51 is an important number to the White Sox, which equals 51 in reduction, both with and without the word the. And as I discussed, we'll also be exploring how this is all synced to the 35th U.S. President, John F. Kennedy. And this is a similar code we've seen with Donald Trump, the current president. And I certainly hope that this isn't a bad omen for the new American Pope. But these patterns are worth exploring. JFK's full name is the 51st prime number, syncing up with the score of this game. JFK died in the year 1963 on the date 1122. Pete Rose was born 19,630 days after Shoeless Joe, and 1,122 weeks after Joe allegedly threw the World Series. So right off the bat, we see strong connections, and we'll expand on this more. Now, the death of Pete Rose, which I discussed on my channel, the video is linked below, was synced up to the date that the moon turned rose on Pi Day this year. On March 14th, there was a total lunar eclipse. Yesterday's announcement was made a span of 61 days after the eclipse. 61, a number very important to Skull and Crossbones, 61. Also in reduction, Chicago Black Sox equals 61, just like Shoeless Joe Jackson. The name Joseph Jackson, another 601. Shoeless Joe and the Pope's birthdays are separated by a span of 61 days on the calendar. And when Pope Leo was shown on television during the World Series, he was 601 months of age. 4 days later, the White Sox captured the World Series championship on a date with primary numerology of 61. And then back in 2021, Major League Baseball played at the Field of Dreams site on a date with 61 numerology. Again, all connecting to Skull and Crossbones. In the alphabetic order, Skull and Crossbones gives us the 223, which is, of course, the opposite of the digits on their emblem, 322. Of course, in 2023, Yale turned 322, not by any coincidence. Well, when the Reds lost this game against the White Sox, check out their new record, 20-23. 223. Yesterday's announcement was a span of 32 weeks and 2 days after the death of Pete Rose. This same duration of time is also 225 days. And in the Latin method of Gematria, also known as Agrippa's key, but a language relevant to the Catholic Church, the name Rose equals 225. And just consider the connection with a guy named Pete Rose. His first name is Peter, and the first ever Pope of the Catholic Church was Saint Peter. Saint Peter and Pete Rose both sum to 103 in the alphabetic order. This is the same as both Joe Jackson and Mercury. And later on, we'll look at an entire post's worth of mercurial syncs for this news. But how old would have Pete Rose been yesterday if he was still alive and kicking? Including the end date, Pete Rose would have been exactly 1,009 months of age. Well, this reflects the digits 1009, much like the date October 9th, which happens to be the founding date of Yale University, home to Skull and Bones. And when Yale celebrated their special Skull and Bones anniversary a couple years ago, it was during Brown lunation number 1946. Every new moon since the year 1923 has been numbered. And you see here that special date, lunation 1246. Well, Pete Rose was born exactly 1,246 weeks after John F. Kennedy, whom we'll be diving into later. And why do we know that the Brown lunation number is so significant in this case? Well, the Brown lunation number first began getting counted in the year 1923. And check out the digits in the White Sox record. They are now 13-29. So you could say they're not the same order, and I would agree. But intriguing nonetheless. So how is Pete Rose connected to the Pope? These two men were born exactly 173 months apart, which is also 752 weeks. Yale University is 173, while Skull and Bones is 752. On the date of yesterday's news, Robert Prevost, the new pope, notice how his age in days ended with 444. His last name Prevost equals 444, which, as I've been teaching for years now, is a very significant number to the Skull and Crossbones Society. The Pope was also born exactly 14 years and 5 months after Pete Rose, matching Chicago, Illinois in Gematria. Also Vatican, Catholic, both 145. Also matching the papal and real names of his predecessor, Pope Francis. But I also want you to think about how the date is written on the calendar. May 13th, 513, or 13/5. And I wouldn't normally advise people to write it out this way, but it's truly fascinating to me. And we're going to look at the values of this phrase in many, many ciphers. Now, the secret society is, of course, just called Skull and Bones, right? Or the Brotherhood of Death. But these are definitely crossbones. And the cross, much like what Jesus died on, this is a secret society steeped in ancient biblical mythology. And the gematria of Yale Skull and Crossbones Secret Society, 513 and 135, which match the date of yesterday's news, May 13th, or the 13th of May. Yesterday was also exactly 105 years and 31 weeks after the end of the Black Sox scandal in 1919. The same digits found in the date. When Pope Leo was seen on television during the World Series, it was 15,310 days after the death of John F. Kennedy. So 1531, 1531. Noteworthy alignments. But let's go back to the posts that I began making yesterday before the news started, so we can dive deeply into how the 1919 World Series was, from the very beginning, an extreme riddle for the Skull and Bones Society and the total solar eclipse code. When Pope Leo XIV was on television, look at how old he was on that day. 18,302 days of age. What year, again, was Skull and Bones founded? That would be, of course, the year 1832. This was also the 2005 World Series. In the alphabetic order, Yale University equals 205. Shoeless Joe Jackson equals 205. And Shoeless Joe's real name, Joseph Jackson, also equals 205. But where this gets undeniable is when we look at the number 267. Because the first American Pope, Leo XIV, is the 267th pontiff of the Catholic Church. And when he was elected, it was a span of exactly 1,267 months after the end of the 1919 World Series, which was thrown by the Black Sox. In the reverse alphabetic order, where Z is 1 and A is 26, Curse of Shoeless Joe equals 267. That's the name of the curse that the White Sox suffered from for nearly a century. Yale Skull and Bones equals 267 in reverse. And when the Pope was on television, it was 267 days before Shoeless Joe's birthday. When Shoeless Joe passed away in 1951, he was 267 mercurial years old. And a mercurial orbit is approximately 88 days. So Mercury orbited the sun 267 times before he died. And again, we'll focus on Mercury a lot in a little bit. Now, we're measuring to the ending date of the 1919 World Series. Why is that? Well, that World Series ended on October 9th. And once again, October 9th, the founding date of Yale University. In the reverse standard method of Gematria, the cipher on the bottom of your screen, where we simply flip the alphabetic order around and use the same numeric structure as the ancient Hebrew and Greek isopsephy charts, Yale University equals 1919. Now, although the scandal did not actually happen until 1919, it was the 1917 World Series that the White Sox last won. So their curse is said to last 88 years because it went from 1917 to 2005. Now, there is a strong astrological, mystical connection between the numbers 1917 and 1919. Why is that? Well, in the year 1919, we had two extremely significant solar events within the same calendar year. First, we had the solar eclipse of May 29th, 1919, which was the longest total solar eclipse in over 500 years on the entire planet. 6 months later, we had an annular eclipse on November 22nd, which was the longest annular eclipse in almost 300 years. So the odds that both of these events lined up in the same year, 1919, are incredibly slim. But look closer at these dates. May 29th and November 22nd. Well, those are the same dates found for JFK, born on May 29th and dead on November 22nd. And JFK was born in 1917, the year of the White Sox last World Series championship. So, through this mystical connection, we see how JFK is linked to the Chicago Black Sox scandal in 1919, which, by the way, has matching gematria with the name John Kennedy. Now, JFK's birthday, the same date as the total eclipse 2 years later, is the 29th of May, or 29/5. This represents the number 295. 295 in Gematria is the value of 223 and 322. Skull and Bones Society and Skull and Bones both also equal 295. When Pope Leo was seen on TV at the World Series, it was the 295th day of the year. His papacy began 1,295 months after JFK was born. And when JFK died, it was on the anniversary of the annular eclipse of 1919, which was 2,295 weeks before he was assassinated. So, a number I talk about in many of my videos, 295, part of this Skull and Bones code. And shout out to the chat. Yes, Gematria is Hebrew, mostly in origin. But as we've come to discover, it is also very, very English. So this date, May 29th, JFK's birthday, the date of the longest eclipse in half a millennia. May 29th is the 149th day of the year. And this is another massive number for Skull and Bones, the Skull and Crossbones Society, or the Yale Skull and Crossbones Secret Society, which was founded by a man named William Huntington Russell, all of these with values of 149. The papacy began 1,409 orbits of the moon after the annular eclipse that was on JFK's death date. And this is also the Pope's birthday, the 14th of September, or 14/9. In fact, the Pope's primary birth numerology is 97, like Skull and Crossbones, Brotherhood of Death, and Death. Chicago Black Sox, Shoeless Joe Jackson, and Catholic, all also 97 in Gematria. And we'll be looking at different measurements of the moon throughout this video, mainly the synodic month and sidereal month. And yeah, it's too bad people can't have eyes to see how clear this language is. I mean, y'all can shout that this is Hebrew as much as you want, but that doesn't explain why I can do very, very easy decodes in English every single time. Anyway. The Pope was on TV 334 days after the assassination date, a number shared with JFK, but what I find more interesting is this. The Chicago Black Sox blew the 1919 World Series, and they lost that World Series 5-3, as they used to play a best-of-9 for a few years. 5-3. Well, when Pope Leo was on television, the score of the game was 5-3. And by the way, they were playing Houston, which was home to George H.W. Bush, a graduate of Skull and Bones. And anyway, this game ended with a score of 5-3 as well. The game was played 5 weeks and 3 days after the Pope's birthday. And it was exactly 503 months after the assassination of John Kennedy, whose name has matching 53 gematria with solar eclipse, which is also 503. The World Series was also 53 years after Shoeless Joe Jackson died. But not only was it 53 years, it was also 53 years and 322 days after his death. That same duration is also 223 mercurial years. And of course, Skull and Crossbones with the 223. In the capital letter cipher, which maintains the alphabetic order, but also pays homage to... Oh, I didn't have that on the screen the whole time, did I? Alright, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, we're looking at the number 53. That's kind of what I missed out on the screen for the last minute. Apologies for that mishap. Again, all of these posts linked below if you want to follow along yourself. But using capital letters, Joseph Jefferson Jackson, his full name, sums to 322. And when the Black Sox lost the 1919 World Series, he was 32 years, 2 months, and 23 days old. Curse of Shoeless Joe is 223 in multiple ciphers. So is 223. Shoeless Joe's death occurred exactly 32 years and 2 weeks after the 1919 annular eclipse, which is also 11,701 days. Yale University established in the year 1701. And shout out to the chat. I will address your guys' questions a little bit later. Got a few more numbers I want to get through, because we have to connect this to Field of Dreams before I go any further. And this World Series game with the Pope was 220 lunar orbits and 3 days after the release of Field of Dreams, 223. And yes, in Hebrew Gematria, the moon equals 223. Now, in Latin Gematria, a number I discuss often on this channel is 572, as this is the value of skull and bones. The Pope became Leo XIV 38,572 days after the 1919 World Series started, but more importantly, is that it was 572 mercurial years after Shoeless Joe was born. And in Satanic Gematria, Field of Dreams equals 572. And isn't it interesting that Field of Dreams first premiered in the United States on the date April 21st? That's the same day that Pope Francis died, April 21st, or 421, which does happen to be the value of Yale Skull and Crossbones Society, 421. Now, the movie would then later come out 2 weeks later on May 5th. In the alphabetic order, Yale Skull and Bones Society equals 288, which actually matches the value of the society's founder, William Huntington Russell, which is 2088. And I noticed a lot of Martian alignments too. I'm not going to mention them in this video, but they're in the post. 288 is the value of the Pope. And this Pope is from Chicago, Illinois, which equals 288. Remember, Barack Obama from Chicago also had the 288 in his age when he was elected. The year 1919, also 2288. 2288 was found in JFK's age for the start of the 2005 World Series. And when Field of Dreams was released, the 2288 was found in the Pope's age. He was also 234 days after his birthday when Field of Dreams came out. And Field of Dreams has matching 234 gematria with the White Sox. Both equal 234. When Leo XIV was elected, it was 234 months after he was on TV. In the alphabetic order, Yale Skull and Crossbones Society is 432, which is the same digits reversed. Pope Francis died exactly 432 months after Field of Dreams came out, which is also exactly 36 years. Field of Dreams, Yale Skull and Bones Society, and the Pope's name Prevost all equal 360. And this brings us to the Great American Total Eclipses, which were separated in days by the 360th prime number. These two eclipses, 2,423 days apart. The 360th prime. And interesting that the Pope and Shoeless Joe have this connection for Martian days. And I'm not really big on the Martian connection here, I'll be honest. Other than the fact that the World Series now ends during the time of Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars, I didn't really have a whole lot to go off of that there. But anyway, the number 101 is also very significant here. Field of Dreams was released 101 years after Shoeless Joe was born. Shoeless Joe Jackson equals 101, just like the numbers 322 and 223. Skull and Bone Society, also 101. And when the 2005 World Series happened, and the end of Shoeless Joe's curse, it was the 101st World Series. And check out the name of the Pope, 101, in reduction. Major League Baseball played its first Field of Dreams game 101 years after the 1919 World Series, which was the same year as those two significant eclipses. And what really blows my mind is that this Field of Dreams game ended with a walk-off home run by a guy named Tim Anderson. And I have a video on this that you can find down below in the description. And look at the gesture that Tim Anderson was making as he was rounding the bases. I know this is a bit small, but maybe I can see it, but he's moving his hands back and forth under his neck. Is that a tribute to Skull and Crossbones? I think it is. It's such a weird gesture. I think he's paying homage to the Skull and Bones. I really do. But tell me what you think in the chat or the comments. I don't know. So, just a quick glance at the chat, and I find it weird that people come here and watch my videos and just tell me that Gematria is just Hebrew. Like, dude, I've been doing this for nearly a decade. Finding numerical alignments in Gematria are very, very simple, and they're the easiest in the most simple ciphers. So I don't know why you're trying to tell me this. It's not like it's going to make me stop. I mean, you can repeat Gematria is Hebrew over and over and over again, but that doesn't change the fact that it isn't only Hebrew. So it's just weird. I feel like there's been trolls lately coming in saying that stuff where they haven't already been before. And yeah, I mean, I don't talk about ZKH, Mr. Hubbard, on this channel much. You know, I'm sure most of you know Zach as one of the hardest workers, a guy who puts out a lot of content, videos, and posts on Gematria. And he and I have a very different approach. When I got into this study of numerology, let's just say that the Matrix or God or whatever the natural order to this universe is, very quickly showed me that what we're looking at is not just an Illuminati ritual. In fact, I now believe that numerology is largely a function of the world we live in. For people in a dark room to be orchestrating all of this and doing it with such perfection for centuries is a little bit on the absurd side to me. However, that does not change the fact that these numerical patterns are very relevant and very easy to find in the language of Gematria. So while I think that there are many people online, and let's not single anyone out, but there's actually, this is a normal thing now for people to make sports predictions with numerology. And look, I've done this too. I've been doing it. Now, you've also noticed that I backed off a little bit. And the reason is I'm simply not seeing things that I was seeing so simply last year. And I'm not going to make predictions if I don't think I have a beat on a game. My belief is that these patterns we're picking up on are an increase in probability. Just because you find a numerical riddle that leads into a future sports game does not mean that team's going to win. Because there could also be a riddle for the other team. And often it comes down to picking which one is stronger, which is a very subjective art, if I could throw my hat in the ring on that. Now, can you use numerology to improve your odds on sports? Absolutely, I believe you can. But I think it's more complex than most people are leading on. And for me, I look at things like synchronicity, something I experience in my life. Or if I see a death in the news or something, or a birth of a royal family member or whatever, that might spark me to look at the numerology for an upcoming related event. But I don't go looking at a sports game and just start digging through the numbers and trying to decide which one. I think that's foolishness. And if people are selling you on that, then that's fraudulent. And if they're so good at making picks, why don't they do what I was doing, which was simply link the post or video they made that's timestamped from before the event? Okay, it's very simple to get haters off your back, but they're not doing that. So that's kind of my take on it right now. You know, again, I know what, you know, I'm running the website, right? So of course it's beneficial for me to say that Gematria is relevant, but I don't just run the website. I also spend the bulk of my life trying to teach how and why this code is important. I think when you look at the deeper astrological connections, it starts to make you question your beliefs about conspiracy. Because there's something to be said about us being meant to find this code and find this language. The fact that John F. Kennedy himself has a wealth of numbers that match the word conspiracy so perfectly is a clue that we as humans are on an awakening journey here. And I get it, you know, a lot of people don't understand that there is a much, much more complex and deeply integrated spiritual system at play in this universe. And if you don't have that perspective, then none of this will really make sense. But I think if you look at things through this lens, it starts to make more sense of why numerology, astrology, and things of the sort are so significant to the occult, so to speak. And yeah, haters won't do the proper research. Again, I'm someone, get this, right? When I found people talking about Gematria, my initial reaction was that it was crazy. It was. So I built a calculator for Excel, and then I later built one for the internet. I did my own research, and I realized, wow, this is the most intricate, beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I basically threw my whole life away and started doing this. So, yeah. So, Ari, thanks for saying that it's Hebrew, but I'm sorry, dude. You clearly don't have the simple perspective that it takes. I mean, you're calling everything I'm sharing a coincidence. And it's like, no, I was working on these posts yesterday before the news story happened. And this is something that comes up all the time. Check out my video on James Earl Jones, which is actually very relevant to this because James Earl Jones was in Field of Dreams. But in this video, I explain how I was talking about the number 99 and James Earl Jones 4 days before he died on 9/9 or September 9th. How did I do this? Because I understand that this isn't just a Hebrew code. So get the fuck out of here with that shit already. My God. All right, sorry for the cussing. Unprofessional. Let's move on. And in this next section, we're talking about the planet Mercury. Now, Mercury connects President John F. Kennedy to Pope Leo XIV. As Kennedy was born under the sign of Gemini, while the Pope was born under Virgo. And in the Western zodiac, these are the two planets ruled by the planet Mercury. We'll also be discussing the magic square of Mercury, which equals 1930 in standard Gematria. Robert Prevost and Roman Catholic Church sums to 193 in the alphabetic order. John F. Kennedy and assassinated both equal 193, reverse. Kennedy was assassinated at the age of exactly 193 mercurial years old. It was also 1,093 days after the birth of JFK Jr. The White Sox broke their long curse 1,093 lunar phases after JFK was born. And consider how the last pope to take the name Leo, well, he died in the year 1903. And check out how old Skull and Bones turned this year. Well, they just so happened to be 193 years old. Now, the 2005 World Series was played during Brown Lunation 1024. The Pope was born in Chicago 13,124 days after the 1919 World Series, which are digits found in his full name, 124. Well, JFK was born exactly 124 mercurial years after Shoeless Joe Jackson. Their birthdays also 317 days apart, matching Mercury in one of the mathematical methods. Now, at the top of the video, we touched on the number 133 with the Chicago Black Sox. Shoeless Joe was 133 mercurial years old during the 1919 World Series. And he died exactly 133 mercurial years after the 1919 annular eclipse. The World Series he lost was 133 days after the total eclipse of 1919. And don't forget, in Latin, 133 equals 1331, the ultimate eclipse number. And I guess I forgot to point this out earlier, how 1,331 equals 1919, which is the year of the World Series we're talking about. It was 13,300 days on Mars between the death of Shoeless Joe and the release of Field of Dreams. And Mercury matches Chicago Black Sox and the Brotherhood of Death. But we're only getting started with Mercury here. The city of Chicago, Illinois, sums to 260, just like 1919, 260. Well, every row and column of the magic square of Mercury sums to 260. And this is a magic square with 64 smaller squares. Isn't it noteworthy that Shoeless Joe died at the age of 64? So this is an 8 by 8 magic square, which is like the number 88. And 88 is the number of days it takes Mercury to orbit the sun. Well, the curse of Shoeless Joe lasted for 88 total years. Chicago White Sox equals 88. Curse of Shoeless Joe and Joseph Jackson share an 88. And when the White Sox went to the 1919 World Series, it was because they won 88 games that regular season. How appropriate for a city that sits right alongside the 88th Western Meridian on the globe. That's right, the globe. Oh, I said it. The number 88 also equals 123 in the alphabetic order. And is it coincidental that 88 and White Sox both equal 123? Curse of the Black Sox equals 1023. And look at how the number 1230 is connected to Shoeless Joseph Jackson, the year 1919, Yale University and Skull and Bones. The World Series even ended 123 weeks after JFK was born. But that's also 2 years, 19 weeks, which matches Curse of Shoeless Joe, Joe Jackson, the White Sox. Yale is in New Haven, Connecticut, which has a double 219. Yeah, that's a good point, by the way, in the chat here about Michael Jordan playing for the White Sox. You know, obviously the whole connection to Pope Francis was mainly through Michael Jordan, as we explored in depth. So that's a good thought, and we can go ahead and dig into that in a little bit. Magic Square of Mercury also has this very intriguing gematria of 2083, which matches 666. Yale celebrates its anniversary on the 283rd day of leap years, which is also the moon, right? And the moon, the sun, the eclipse code, the magic square of the sun sums to 666. And of course, the sun rules the sign of Leo, which is the name of the new pope. So it's hard to exhibit perfectly, but there's this deeper connection with Mercury and the sun here. But look at this. Pope Leo XIV was born exactly 283 orbits of Mercury after Shoeless Joe Jackson. This means he was also born 283 days after the date that Shoeless Joe died. And furthermore, 283 is the 61st prime number, which is a number I discussed earlier on in this video. The whole Field of Dreams and Curse of Shoeless Joe appears to be coded around the number 61. Also notice how Mercury has the same gematria as Joe Jackson, 618. Well, when the Pope was on TV, he was 601 months and 8 days old. The White Sox broke the curse of Shoeless Joe 6,018 days after Shoeless Joe was showed on the silver screen. Revelation also has the 618. And, yeah, that's obviously connected to the number 666. When you write out 666, and shout out to Cuts1 in the chat, maybe you can learn something from this video, right? When you write out the number 666, it equals 1266. And 12 is 6 plus 6. Well, the Pope was elected during Brown lunation number 1266. And if you don't include the end date, he was elected exactly 1,266 months after the World Series ended in 1919. The 666, huge for the Brotherhood of Death. And would you believe this? How old was Shoeless Joe? All right, so Shoeless Joe Jackson, born in 1887, right? And remember, the Chicago White Sox won the World Series in 2005. So that was right after Shoeless Joe turned 666 lunar phases old. 666. And he turned that age on October 9th, which is Yale's anniversary. And then the World Series started with Pope Leo on television 13 days later. $666. What are the odds, right? Well, Field of Dreams came out 13,666 days after Shoeless Joe Jackson. The Pope was elected 1,366 days after the Field of Dreams game was played with the White Sox in it. And this provides digits that connect to the solar eclipse I was discussing. This 1919 total eclipse belonged to Solar Saros 136. And remember, Saros 136 began in the year 1360, when it was still 13/6 in the Western Hemisphere. And don't forget, the Jesuits were founded 3 days before an eclipse from this Saros. And check it out. The Jesuits equals 136 in ordinal. But I know that's a coincidence because Gematria is only Hebrew. God, who are these people? I've never seen people so devoted to idiocy before. It's just sad, man. Like, sorry, you're actually talking to an intelligent Gematria channel here. Yeah. I actually wonder if that was his other account. How much you want to bet that Ari account was Cuts1, and then after I banned him, he came back under his other account to talk more trash? I bet it was the same guy. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the sun, moon, and eclipse code. And man, we're already an hour in. This is longer than I was hoping to go, but that's what happens with this... these freaking Mandelbrot zooms that we're trying to get to the bottom of. So again, we're all talking about the 1919 World Series, and in the Tarot's major arcana, the 19th card is the Sun. And this is an important number to the Sun and the Moon. The Metonic cycle is 19 years, a period that syncs up the solar and lunar calendars. Which means there's also a solar eclipse exactly 19 years after a previous one quite frequently. And solar eclipse equals 190. The Black Sox lost the World Series exactly 19 weeks after the 1919 total eclipse. Shoeless Joe died 190 days after the date of that eclipse and JFK's birthday. The last name Jackson equals 19 in reduction. Field of Dreams was even released 19 weeks before the Pope's birthday. But a huge connection here is how the number 19 equals 244 in Latin. Shoeless Joe's real name, Joseph Jefferson Jackson, shares 244 gematria with Jackson and White Sox. The 19th prime number is 67. A few years ago, I did a post on the death of actor Ray Liotta, who played Shoeless Joe Jackson in the movie Field of Dreams. And it was all about the number 19, 67, the magic square of the sun. See how it's the same patterns in these stories, guys? And then at the end of this post, what about this? I have a whole section on Mercury. And I didn't even know this until I went back to the post and realized, oh yeah, again, it's the same code. Ray Liotta, not only did he die at the age of 67, but he was also born 67 years after Shoeless Joe. This is the reduction gematria of Robert Prevost. 67, and look at how old he was when the White Sox broke Shoeless Joe's curse. He was exactly 670 lunar orbits old. The Chicago Black Sox equals 670. So does Chicago, Illinois. So does the first ever Pope, St. Peter. All 670. And this guy was on TV at the game. When Leo was elected, it was exactly 1,443 lunar orbits after JFK was born. And 443 is the value of the sun in Latin. 443 is the 86th prime number. The number 19 shares 86 gematria with the Chicago White Sox and Mercury. Shoeless Joe was 860 sidereal months old when he died. And that matches the length of the Shoeless Joe curse, 86 years. The curse was broken exactly 400, or I'm sorry. Sorry guys, there's so many numbers, but they are linked. The curse of Shoeless Joe was not only 86 years, but also 4,490 weeks, exactly. Field of Dreams came out exactly 449 months after Shoeless Joe died, and 449 lunar orbits after the Pope was born. When the Pope was elected, it was 22,449 days after the JFK assassination. And JFK was the first ever president to be a Catholic. Catholic Church equals 449. But this number also connects to the sun because 449 is the 87th prime number. Chicago, Illinois, Catholic, and the Catholic Church all give us the 87. Leo was 8 years and 70 days old when Kennedy was killed. And his papal name, Leo the 14th, has matching 87 ordinal gematria with both the sun and black socks. Shoeless Joe died on a date with 87 and 33 numerology. GG, what are you talking about? No, the work's never off. No, why you distract me like that? Show me what I'm wrong with, and I will be happy to admit that I was wrong. But no, this math is always correct. That's why I built the calculators, so that I could do it easily. Anyway. The sun matches Yale's Skull and Bones and Freemasonry in Gematria 787, which represents the distance between the Field of Dreams movie and the Field of Dreams game. Also the 138th prime to provide more connections. And one other one I want to mention is this. John Kennedy equals 125 in the alphabetic order. Shoeless Joe was born on December 5th. Or I'm sorry, he died on that date. 12/5. Field of Dreams came out on the 125th day of the year. The 125th prime number is 691, which is like eclipse of the sun. Also, Masonry equals 691. And 691... yeah, that's the 125th prime number. Now, Masonry also equals 105, like Pope Leo, who was elected 105 years after the 1919 World Series and eclipse. I think we'll wrap this video up with this, before I quickly touch on the organic stuff. Shoeless Joe Jackson was born under the sign of Cancer, which is the only sign ruled by the moon. The word moon equals 218 in Hebrew Gematria. And when the Black Sox lost the World Series, Yale University turned exactly 218 years old on that date. The date 21/8 or 8/21, that's like the date of the first Great American Eclipse in 2017, August 21st. And when Field of Dreams was released in 1989, it was the very first day of Brown lunation number 821. The World Series in 1919 ended 281 days before the birthday of Shoeless Joe Jackson, who shares 281 with Black Sox. That last game was also 28 months and 10 days after JFK was born. These same three digits are found in the number 128, which matches Shoeless Joe's birth numerology. Leo the 14th was elected on the 128th day of the year. And remember, it was white smoke first reported at 12:08 p.m. Eastern. White smoke and brotherhood both equal 128. The election was 12,800 Martian days after Field of Dreams came out. And we know this is important because the Field of Dreams game was played in Iowa on the 12th of August, or 12:08. And that game featured a special appearance from actor Kevin Michael Costner, whose name has matching 1208 gematria with John F. Kennedy in the Latin cipher. I also noticed the value of Yale's Skull and Crossbones Secret Society matches the magic square of the moon. It also matches Shoeless Joe's, I guess, the number of days from Shoeless Joe's death to the start of the World Series in 2005. I mean, there's so much more I kind of skipped over here because it's not directly related to the overarching theme. In fact, I have a fourth post on this, technically a fifth, with a whole wealth of notes that didn't have any other place in those posts. But I felt like we're worthy of being documented anyway. And I mean, this is what happens when you start doing deep dives and you start digging through the rabbit hole. Sometimes you bite off more than you can chew. And again, finding these alignments is no sweat. I'm familiar with the code that's running. It's just a matter of putting these images together and organizing them into a digestible fashion. I have no idea if I'm doing a good enough job at it. Some of you guys are still watching, so I must be doing okay. But, you know, it's just, I've seen so much gematria, and it is getting better out there on the internet. A lot of channels are starting to pick up on the supreme significance of the astrological side of this code, and are doing great work to share it. But when I first started this, nobody was really doing that. So that's why I always focus on the deep side, to show people, you know, you can legitimize this work by understanding more about the world and the cycles of the moon and the sun. Oh, more trolls. I love it. Welcome, guys. Welcome indeed. So, I wanted to mention my own organic synchronicity to this. Now, I mentioned this a little bit in the end of my first video on Pope Leo, but this synchronicity kind of exploded even after this video. And what I touched on there is how the Pope being from Chicago is connected to me mystically. Now, I live in Milwaukee, which is, you know, about a little over an hour north of Chicago. And my business partner is in Kenosha. My business partner owns a company that helps run the website run by Lou Prevost. If I can look this up here. So the Pope's older brother, Lou, he runs this website for the Paul F. Foster. And you can see here, right? Lou Prevost continues to improve the website. And if you look at the website, you know, you look at the top bar here, and then you scroll all the way to the bottom, that looks very familiar, doesn't it? That's because it's the same company that helped build my website through this WordPress functionality. See, the bottom and the top of the sites are the same. So as it turns out, my business partner knows the Pope's brother. And I was like, wow, that's super cool, right? I mean, maybe we can try and slip Gematria into the teachings of the Catholic Church. Now, I don't exactly have my hopes up on that, because I believe they know exactly what's going on and are actively suppressing it. But it's interesting nonetheless. And the whole reason I got into Gematria was because the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, and my family suffered a tragedy that same day. And it was all connected by the numbers through Gematria. And that's what taught me immediately that this is not just some occultic ritual. Like, this is the patterns of the universe we live in. So I already discussed this, right? How I was synced to the Cubs in the World Series. And part of my connection to that game is this. During the 9th inning of Game 7 of the 2016 World Series, they started showing fans in the crowd, and they showed hundreds of fans in the crowd during this game, right? But one of them just so happened to be like the best friend of my parents. This guy here, his name is Daniel, and he's from Chicago, lives in the north suburbs, a lifelong Cubs fan, and he went to Game 7, paid out of his ass for a ticket, and suffered through the tense moments to watch his team win the World Series. And I took this screenshot recently. I went back and grabbed it out of the YouTube footage of the game. And this was like my mystical link almost to the game, is that I know this guy who was on TV during the game. And after I thought about that, then we find out that Pope Leo was on TV during the World Series. And I was like, are you serious? Like, what are the odds, right? That I was already talking about this synchronicity. Now, the guy that I know at the World Series, his wife passed away last year. And it was in August. And remember, the new pope is an Augustinian. And she died on August 5th, 8-5. The pope was elected on 8-5, the 8th of May. And I talked about this in one of my Organic Matrix super streams, number 81. And you'll find this on my Organic Matrix playlist, which is linked down below in the description. So it just keeps rolling. I might do another post on it later. I actually did a post on this on my blog. It's called My Organic Synchronicities with the First American Pope, and it's about a trip I took to Chicago and a bar called the Cubby Bear, and how I saw an Elvis impersonator play at that bar in a band called Dred Zeppelin. And it's just wild because I've been logging syncs with Elvis to this year's Kentucky Derby on my blog. And our friend Jan, who passed away in August last year, she held Kentucky Derby parties every year. She was from Louisville. So I can't put into words how startling it was to find how synced my life has been to the Pope. Again, this is the side of Gematria that I want people to see. You know, that it's not just what's going on the television and in the news that we're all synced to. So that's pretty much all I have to say. The one thing I want to mention, you know, Gigi mentioned earlier in the chat, I thought that was kind of inappropriate to say that I am intentionally wrong. That's okay. No, because that implies that I'm deceiving people. And I've never once deceived anyone on this channel, and I never will. So please never make that assumption. If you find that a number is one off, perhaps it's linked, and of course you don't have any examples because I'm never wrong. But if you do have any examples of me being a day off, you might be looking at lunar counts. And this is the result of how it might be one day off because of how they're calculated. Lunar counts aren't like calendar days. It's not just 1 to 1. A lunation is a fraction of a day, and it lands halfway through the day. So if you measure to that day or the next day, it's going to count as an exact match. And then as a result, the number of days after the lunation may be slightly off. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. Again, I mean, there's no examples of me having incorrect gematria or measurements because they are never wrong. So, all right. Yeah, I don't know how it's deception. I mean, I would like for you to tell me that, even though I don't care because, again, I've been making this for 10 years. Teaching the same code, the same numbers with the same ciphers, the same measurement techniques. So, while some of my friends think I'm crazy, I think you guys are equally as crazy for thinking that. Like, oh, it's only in one language. Well, how many languages have humans speaked in history? Well, it's not the original Jewish language, so it doesn't count. Oh, what are you saying? Jews are the only race that counts? I mean, I'm part Jewish, ethnically, and I would heavily disagree with that. So I don't know, this is kind of stupid. It's a debate, obviously, that neither side is ever going to budge on. I'm going to have this channel for years and years and years, and I'm going to be teaching about the same numbers with the same ciphers and the same codes. And I don't have to play with numbers, which is what, most people have to do. What is a debate to you? This is the thing. It's like so many of these people say, oh, it doesn't exist. Well, let me see how many posts I have on this blog. Let me see. I'm going to look this up in the other browser real quick. 3,442 published posts explaining how every single major news story of the last 7 years has been synced up to English gematria. I don't need to debate you guys. It's foolish. It's just so weird. And I'm glad that you guys are at my channel and I don't have the foolishness to visit your channel and tell you you're wrong. Because I guarantee you there is knowledge to be found in Hebrew gematria, and I probably don't teach enough of it. Strong's Concordance, we see this all the time. But we speak English here, and English is the language that most of the world now speaks. And when you look at the numeric values of them, and how well they sync up with the astrotheological codes, it's undeniable. So, no, I won't debate you, because I already have 3,500 things of evidence. And me debating is going to be me asking you how you can think this is all a coincidence. And you'll be like, well, what about this? What about that? They're stupid. They're masturbatory and they're wastes of time. All right, everybody. With that, I'm going to wrap the stream up today. This was a fun one. We went nearly an hour and a half, much longer than I thought. And again, the reason is because there's so much to talk about. And it's so easy to discover. That if only so many more people would open their eyes, then maybe I wouldn't have to slave for a day over all these posts, as we'd have more people catching on to this and seeing how important the numbers are. And this is the thing, too. You guys just say stuff like, Cuts One has done more research on the topic than you have. Well, that may be, but how do you know that? How do you know that? You don't have any idea how much time I've spent researching and looking at things. You just don't know. You're a fool. Because you look at what I'm teaching and you actually think it's coincidental that numbers line up this easily by random chance. You're a fool. All right, everyone. Peace, love, God bless. Do check the links in the description for more info and related content that I've been doing for years. Also, check out other great Gematria channels. Decoding with Cody is up there. I recently gave Widow's son a shout out. Check out his channel. 7154 was another one I linked. A lot of people doing good work out there, so Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
See ya.